a Dungeons & Dragons player sets her Dungeon Master's house on fire, and D&D players disregard their Dungeon Master's time by going full murder hobo. All this and more on today's D&D Horror Stories with D&D Doge. Now, with that said, let's get into the post. Real Fireball by Reddit user PrestigiousAnt51. I was invited for my first time playing D&D to a game with all new players. This included the DM. Despite us all being new to the game, we all were really into D&D, having watched YouTube videos and other such things long before ever getting a chance to play. We were all aware that as new players, we were going to make mistakes and not realize it, as no one in the group had any experience. Our Dungeon Master was really into planning everything out, going so far as to make dungeon maps and sets out of paper mache. He had 7 different 3D models of dungeons and buildings that we would encounter in our game. This is an estimate, as we never actually got to see them all. Each one took up the entire length of the table, like 8 foot by 4 foot, I'm guessing. These sets could be up to 3 foot high. Everyone was really excited after seeing not only the starting map, but also the others stacked up on top of each other and set off to the side with a blanket covering them. Well, while we couldn't see the sets, we knew what they were by looking at the bottom. After our first session, one of our players wanted to do more and get a little more creative. She was a sorcerer and decided to bring objects that could act as effects for each of the spells she would cast. It was a fun addition to our sessions. At least, it was a fun addition right up until she decided to cast color spray. She did this with a can of spray paint. First off, color spray is light, not paint, so this didn't make sense to anyone, which we explained to her. Secondly, by using the spray paint, she ruined part of the set that the DM had worked so hard to make. At this point, we made a rule that spell effects that could cause damage to the set were no longer allowed. She followed the rules, and for several sessions after this, it all worked out fine. We were taking our time understanding the mechanics. As such, the gameplay was slow, but eventually we got to the point where our sorcerer leveled enough to cast Fireball. I am sure you all can guess where this is going. Our sorcerer took a plate out of her bag and placed it on the table so that the maps that we were working with wouldn't be damaged. She then took the mini that she was targeting and put it on the plate. Finally, casting Fireball, she crumpled up a piece of paper, lit it on fire, and threw it at the mini. Well, that's a brilliant thing to do. This can only go well. The piece of paper then bounced off the mini, rolled over the edge of the plate, and lit the paper mache playmap on fire. As it turns out, paper mache is extremely flammable, and the entire set goes up almost instantly. Stat sheets and other papers we were working with quickly followed suit. In the chaos, the fire somehow jumped from the table to the other paper mache maps and sets on the side. At this point, it should be noted that this was the DM's house that we were playing at. The DM freaked out, and as soon as he saw the fire, he ran out of the house and used his cell phone to call 911. One of our players left to look for a fire extinguisher that he never found. I'll admit, I was kind of frozen after the initial jump up and move away from the table. The girl was crying and apologizing frantically. It was the last 2 players who finally did something. One of the 2, the only other girl at the table, goes over to the snack area and grabs a 2-liter bottle of pop and says, "I cast shape water" repeatedly, as she then pours all 3 bottles over the fire on the table and actually manages to put it out. The fact that she not only put out the fire, but actually turned it into a joke was just awesome. FYI, she was not playing with a magic character. However, she did have a feat that gave her access to shape water, which somehow made the whole thing funny. The final guy saw what the girl was doing and finally jumped into action and started using a blanket to smother the fire on the other papier-mâché playsets. I have no idea what you would call those. Maps, playsets, dungeons, whatever. This was something that I decided to help with once I saw that it was actually working. We somehow managed to put the fire out with only surface level damage to the house. The guy who put the fire out had a minor burn, but that was the only injury that occurred as a result of the incident. After speaking to police and fire people, we were allowed to go home. A little while later, after things cooled down, we were deciding whether we would continue playing. We eventually decided that we would continue playing. However, what we could not decide on is whether the girl who started the fire should be removed from the game or not. Normally, this would be a no-brainer, except she didn't do it on purpose. Well, her plate idea was not the smartest if it worked, as she should have been following the rules we had set. Though with how sorry she was afterward, and the fact that she's completely okay with us playing without her because of what she did, makes me feel guilty for kicking her out of the game. What do you guys think? Well, that was a colossally stupid thing to do. Honestly, how did that player think that would go? Thankfully, the other female player had a level head and state of mind to use what was around her to put the fire out by using the soda and even cracking a joke in the process. Talk about rising to the occasion. And at least no one was hurt, aside from one player with only superficial burns. Now, as far as inviting that player back to the game, that would be entirely up to the DM, as it was his house that she almost burnt down. Now, my opinion is that she didn't mean to do what she did, and just didn't use her head. And as long as she pays for the damages and agrees to never do any quote special effects again, that she should be allowed to come back. Though, what are your thoughts? Should they welcome her back to the game? Or does what she did constitute a permaban? Be sure to let us know your opinions in the comments. But with that said, let's move on. I Smear Crap on the Walls by Reddit user HappySalesman01. In all my years of playing D&D and DMing, I have never been so disgusted that I quit a session early and pull the Rocks Fall Everyone Dies card. I did that last night. My players, after weeks of session breaking and then finally campaign breaking behavior, pushed me to my absolute limit. Our cast consists of Fighter, probably the most experienced player in the game, also the biggest offender when it came to session and campaign breaking. Monk, the party idiot, self-described. Rogue, my wife, and aside from playing as a klepto, the most sane one at the table. Druid, the quietest, most antisocial character I've ever seen in D&D. Literally did nothing in every session, except for the last two, unless there was combat. We played online, and all of them but my wife were people found through r/looking for game. After the party fighter got our monk killed in a zombie ambush, it was later admitted to me that the reason for this was because their, quote, agent of chaos mindset was triggered when another player wasn't taking their suggestions to play in the most meta way possible in a fight. The party returned to town, and through a bunch of murder hoboing and session breaking, ended up with the fighter and druid arrested, and the rogue managing to escape. I introduced the one player's new character as someone having also been thrown in the jail, and let them roleplay for a bit while the rogue did some work to set up an escape for them. Instead of them doing anything to address their predicament, what I got was non-stop attempts from the three of them to piss off the guards, which culminated in the druid taking a dump in the bucket in their cell and flinging it at the bars. When I told them that it just made a mess in their cell, their response was, "I pick it up and start smearing it on the walls." At that point, something in me just broke. I realized that over the course of the last 6 sessions or so, that none of them, save for the rogue, actually respected the work I was putting into the game, or me. So I took my headset off and stepped away, intending to come back and have a talk with the party. As I was coming back, I heard my wife tell them, "I'm pretty sure you guys made him quit the session," which was met with a bunch of laughter and jokes. It was at this point that I decided I was fully done, so I left the voice chat, threw a "rocks fall, everyone dies" into the text channel, which was apparently met with more jokes and laughter, and then turned off my computer. I think I'm done with D&D for a while. At the very least, I'm never playing with randos online ever again. Thanks for letting me rant, y'all. TLDR. Players engage in murder hoboing and game breaking, culminating in one player declaring that they are going to smear crap all over the walls of their jail cell before I finally snapped. Well, talk about a crappy situation to be in. Though, in all seriousness, those players definitely did not respect OP's game or the time OP was taking to run a game for them. Now, don't get me wrong, some comedy in games of D&D is bound to happen, though these players were taking it to the extreme and just generally being murder hobos. Honestly, at the first sign of these players being this way, OP should have paused the game to tell said players that he wanted them to take the game a bit more seriously than they were. And who knows, they may have listened. Though it sounds like OP didn't let them know that they were ruining the game for them. And just walking away from the computer and then ending the game doesn't do anything to convey that OP was displeased with these players' actions. Now, I would say to OP to not let this experience prevent them from playing with new people online, as you can make some great friends that way. Just next time, lay out ahead of time what you expect from the players, and vice versa. Basically a session 0. Though, what advice would you give OP here? I would love to know your thoughts. But before we get into the next post, here is Luna to remind you to crit the like button and subscribe. Luna. Luna. Thanks, Luna. Now let's get into the following story. The Dungeon of That Doesn't Seem to Work by Reddit user Slider4337. So we were playing a campaign that was 3.5/Pathfinder 1st Edition with a Total Magic homebrew overhaul by the DM. Basically, it was a stress test of the system. It's important for context here that you had to spec into build-up trees of spells, just like a skill tree in many games. In short, you had to learn certain low-level spells to get higher-level spells, even if you had no intention of using the low-level spells. The system was fine for wizards and story keepers, an intelligence-based bard homebrew class, because they could learn more spells from scrolls to meet those prerequisites. However, as a cleric, I could only learn 4 spells a level, and could not supplement that, and about 50% of my spell library was just prerequisites for the actual spells I wanted. I had spec'd heavily into summoning and healing and restoration magic to support the party. So we get to this dungeon, with me as the cleric, the story keeper, a multi-class charisma monk, paladin, bard, sorcerer, and a witch. We'll call the dungeon the Red Castle. We encountered our first challenge, a mirror with a bodak in it. I look to investigate, fail a save, and immediately gain 4 negative levels. We cover the mirror, and I burn a slot and some diamond dust to cast Greater Restoration. "It doesn't seem to work," the DM says, "but you do lose the diamonds and the slot." Cut to our first combat, where I try to summon with a spell. "It doesn't seem to work," the DM says, then moves on to the next person's turn. Storykeeper tries to use Inspire Courage to help us out. "It doesn't seem to work," the DM says. This was the same for the witch's damage spells, as they were built as a blaster caster, and the monsters seem immune to the multi-class's unarmed strikes, even though multi-class was built to be the best at that. We almost die and barely scrape by thanks to me leaning in on my channel positive energy, since my healing spells won't work either. When we confront the DM afterwards, he said, "Oh, I designed it so your main stuff wouldn't work, to force you to do other things." After having us play a homebrew that forced us to narrowly build for only a few things. DMs, don't turn off your player character skills. Man, that sounds like a bunch of BS. Especially the part where the DM made OP's character drop 2 entire character levels after encountering the Bodak in the mirror. Like OP said, why make a homebrew system that extremely limits what the characters can do, and then throw them into a dungeon that makes them not be able to use the characters how they were built for? Part of me thinks that this DM should just stick to the system as it is written, and not try to reinvent the wheel, especially if this is the result. Though, what are your thoughts on this one? On to the next post. I haven't had a single turn in combat in 5 months. By Reddit user 6000 Piezas. This one is still ongoing, but it's gone to a point where it stopped being funny a while ago. Not a full horror experience, but one of the most frustrating things I've experienced. This was a Pathfinder 1st Edition campaign. Just keep that in mind. So, around 2.5 years ago, I joined an already started campaign as a substitute for another player. Being the newest member, I decided to adapt and fill whatever role the party needed, and most of them were frontline or tanks, an Inquisitor, Fighter, and Paladin. Since the setting was not a gritty Game of Thrones low magic one, I asked if it was okay if I made a glass cannon spellcaster. The DM liked it, the party liked it, so I got to work. Now, saying the campaign was homebrew heavy would be an understatement. I'm not talking about hybrid or alternative classes, but more of the flavor of what Valda and Kibbles provide for D&D. I was not comfortable with the system yet, so I asked if it was going to be an issue if I played a raw build. DM said it was perfectly fine. Those classes were just flavor in case someone wanted to try something new, but not a requirement. Fast forward to our first fight. I am rocking less than half of the HP of the rest of the party, but I should be fine as long as I know how to position my character, right? Wrong. Every single enemy will either spawn in combat right next to me, risk multiple opportunity attacks just to down me, or, the funniest example, the enemy just so happened to be hiding on the ceiling and dropped right in front of me, downing me before we rolled initiative. They got to the point that they would stand there and wait for someone to heal me so they could down me again. They were not single enemy fights, and most of them would rock 10 to 20 enemies plus a gimmick. So that meant every time my turn was skipped in death saving throws, a good hour to an hour and a half would pass before it was my turn to roll a death saving throw again. It started to dawn on me why every single player had a build that put them on 3 digits of HP. When I asked my DM about the focus I was getting, they responded with, "Well, the enemy can see you're a spellcaster, and they prioritize the person that can kill a lot of them easily." Which is very fair, but still, it didn't sit well with me. I brought up that I was not having fun, and that maybe I should create a new character that fit the battle mechanics better. But they said that I was filling an unnecessary niche. I was just, quote, unlucky. Inquisitor and I started keeping notes as a joke of how many spells I'd cast in combat. We noticed last session that the last time I did anything was on June 1st, thanks to a surprise round. and I have been eating the dust ever since. I don't plan on leaving the group because they are my friend group, and tabletop RPGs are, honestly, the only time we can hang out together monthly without work or life being in the way. But it's getting hard not to astral project to a better game when combat rolls around, to be fully honest. Wow, now that is a long time to go without having an actual turn in combat. Now, while it does make sense for some enemies to target a spellcaster first, there are a lot of enemies that would not have an intelligence score high enough to realize this, like beasts and such. Now, I know that OP already talked to the DM about the enemies always seeming to target them, though I would bring it up again, and show him the fact that you haven't had an actual turn in combat for that long, while bringing up that not all enemies should target OP's character off the bat. Then, if the DM doesn't budge, I would either tell him to let you make a new character, or you're going to walk, as no D&D is better than bad D&D. I'm sure that after that, he would at least let OP make a new character. But that is all I have for you today. As always, I appreciate all of you, and hope that your games remain horror story free. Until next time.